He pushed a thick packet of papers into my hands and said, "You won't be on the deeds anymore." The sentence landed like a key on a closed door. Betrayal tightened my throat. I could not call it anything else. I looked down and found my name crossed by a single printed clause that transferred the house, the parcels of land, and the title deeds to an entity I had never signed for. "Why is this dated 3 days ago?" I asked. Luca did not answer at once. He kept driving the way he always did, steady without speed, but his fingers tapped the ring at his knuckle as if thinking aloud. "I am Elena Rossi." I had married Luca Moretti 6 years earlier behind a small church and a larger expectation. My life had been measured in quiet things. A thin gold wedding band I had slid on without spectacle, a worn leather notebook I kept in the glove compartment, a small vintage locket that had been my mother's. Tonight I sat under an amber streetlight in his parked car and realized a decision about me had been signed, dated, and filed without my knowledge. The concrete problem was clear. Someone had taken my name off property papers and arranged for my relocation. That decision had consequences that would change where I lived and how I moved through my days. Luca's face was cast in the car's dim dome light. He wore a charcoal overcoat, his hair combed back, and a heavy signet ring gleamed when his hand rested on the steering wheel. He did not raise his voice, which made his words sharper. "It had to be done for the family's stability," he said. "Stability for what?" I snapped. The question came out short because anger replaced the stunned pressure in my chest. The first shift came quick, betrayal to sharp anger. I put a thumb on the paper's edge and felt the grain of the cardstock under my nail, as if grounding me. He closed his mouth. "Elena," he said, and the name was private, the sound he'd use only in rooms where he kept his guard down. There were pressures. There were better options if you had agreed, but this was decided. My voice went quieter. "Who signed it?" I asked. He looked at me then, and for a second his composure loosened. "The board and council," he said. "It was legal." A sentence later he added, "It's for your safety." Safety, the word arrived as a rational and not an answer. The second emotional shift arrived as doubt. Was it protection or control? We left the car and walked into the marble foyer. The house smelled of leather and lemon polish. A tall lamp threw a warm pool of light along the staircase. I set the papers on the marble console and watched him stand motionless, hands folded at his back. "Explain it," I said. "Explain why my name is gone and who agreed to move me." He tilted his head, a small motion I had seen when he was weighing business negotiations. "I did what I thought was necessary for our standing, Luca. You are not being exiled, Elena. Think of it as repositioning." The words were measured. His stillness made the betrayal more physical. I stepped closer, my fingers flat on the packet. "Repositioning without telling me is still a decision about me, Luca." "Not with me." He reached for the packet, like a man taking a document back from the ledger of a mistake. "Give me that," he said. I slid the papers away and met his eyes. No, the refusal felt like an action unfamiliar to me. As if I had practiced my voice into steadiness, and now the practice bore fruit. His hand trembled when he tapped the ring. He spoke then in shorter sentences. "Elena, this is necessary for appearances, for the family, for whom?" I interrupted. My words had a clipped rhythm now. I named him every time to keep the exchange anchored. "Luca, who signed this? Who filed it?" He inhaled. "Your name had become a liability to a negotiation. The attorneys filed on our behalf." At that, I pulled the packet open and read aloud the added clause. A preservation clause reserving the right to relocate me under specific terms, and a third-party signature I did not recognize. The next morning I met Sofia for coffee at the small cafe down the street. We spread the copies across the table. The cafe smelled of espresso and citrus. A barista shaped milk into a heart and set it down between us. Sofia's hands folded around her mug. "Show me," she said. "Show me everything." The mood shifted from raw questioning to practical inquiry. I handed her the photocopies. She read the preservation clause, glanced at the third-party signature, and frowned. "This signature isn't from your usual counsel, Sofia. It's from a trust office. And the date is before you had a chance to sign anything." She sipped coffee, then tapped the corner of the page. "We need the original." The action was small and direct. "Verify the plan formed out of that demand." Sofia is blunt in the way people who have had to hold others together become. She folded her fingers and asked questions I had not known to ask. "Did Luca tell you about a possible transfer? Did he ask, "Did you see any notice?" My answers were short. No, no, no. Anger returned in shorter bursts, and then steadied into resolve. We made a list of steps. We would visit the family lawyer. We would check the filing records. We would ask the estate registrar for signed originals. Sophia's voice stayed bright, practical. She tapped the list with a chipped nail. The third emotional shift moved me from doubt into focus. The change felt like putting on shoes which fit. At the family lawyer's office, the receptionist paused when I said my name. The hesitation was a physical thing, the way her smile faltered for 2 beats. The waiting room smelled of old leather and photocopy toner. A man in a grey suit opened the file and did not meet my eyes immediately. He flipped pages like someone counting off time. "Ms. Rossi," he said finally, "there was a transfer filed 3 days ago." The forms were completed and signed by counsel with authority. We acted within instruction. I asked for the originals. He led me to a private room. The lawyer pushed a copy of the file toward me and pointed to the signature block. The receptionist had misfiled a note. Between the pages I found an internal memo stamped with a small ink insignia from the Moretti Trust office and a hand. Signed name I had seen once at dinner but never connected to a formal role, Luca's uncle, Marco. I read the signature 3 times. "Marco signed these," I said. The lawyer's mouth tightened. "The trust has power of attorney in certain family matters," he said. I felt the ground shift again. It was not only counsel in the abstract. A family member had moved pieces in a way that presented as legal housekeeping. The twist reframed the entire decision. This was not a clerical error, it was intentional leverage. Back in Luca's study that evening, I brought the papers with the internal memo and the trust stamp. He did not look surprised when I stood in the doorway. He folded his hands, the same posture he used for negotiation. "You found it?" he said. "Yes." My voice did not break. I set the documents on his desk and removed my wedding band. The action was deliberate, not theatrical. I placed the thin gold circle on the blotter between his leather, bound planner and a stack of envelopes. He reached for it before I could step back. "Alina," he said, and for the first time I heard a tremor in his low, even voice. There was a rapid exchange then, short lines like a saw cutting through a wood pile. "Give me the ring." "No, you can't do this now. I'm done letting decisions be made for me. You are overreacting, Luca." Marco signed authority. "You didn't tell me." He leaned forward, fingertips together. "I protected you by signing my name away without asking," I replied. The argument pulsed. 3, 4, 5 rapid back and forth lines. Each name was used to anchor who said what. "Luca," I said. "Marco," he answered. "Sophia," I said later when I called on her to verify filings. The quick dialogue served to reveal motive and fracture. When he reached to take the ring back, his hand was steady but his eyes flicked away. The climax arrived not in a raised voice but in a simple refusal and a visible act. I pulled the ring back toward me and slipped it into my pocket. "If you expect me to be moved for the family's image, do it without my consent," I said. "Do not expect me to sign whatever makes someone else comfortable." He inhaled. His jaw tightened. He stood and crossed the study to the window, hands braced on the sill. "You are making this personal," he said. "It is personal," I replied. The word landed as a small, hard thing. He turned and saw my face. For a breath I watched something like a ledger close in him. He had not expected resistance. The power balance shifted because I had performed one concrete motion. I removed the ring and refused to surrender my agency on paper. He left the room to find counsel on the phone. The study door closed and the house felt larger in the silence. I opened my notebook and wrote a line. "Confirm filings, call registrar, meet Sophia at dawn." Writing the steps steadied me. The chapter contained an immediate fallout. There was a knock at the study door. Luca's voice called, clipped and professional as if relaying a corporate update. "They say it is standard procedure in such transfers." They say the trust had authority. I stood and listened. The argument had drained energy from him. He spoke then with a kind of brittle quiet. "If you insist on contesting this, the family will not be pleased." My throat went tight, but my hands did not tremble. I put the notebook into my bag and walked out. Outside the gate at dawn I waited while the sun made the wrought iron glow amber. I held the locket in my palm and felt the warm dent where the chain had rested for years. Sophia arrived, hair tucked into a scarf, hands in her pockets, breath visible in the cool air. She handed me a list printed in her handwriting. Dates to request originals, names of registrars, a contact for an independent attorney. We start with the registrar and then we move to an injunction if needed, she said. Her voice was direct. The plan was a series of small tasks that together would force answers. At the gate I paused. The estate behind me rose in neat lines of hedges and marble. Luca stood a yard behind me on the gravel, his posture watchful but unassuming. He called my name once. I turned. Elena, he said low. I did not step back. Instead, I showed him the locket between my fingers, the ring absent and the notebook at my side. I'm leaving Luca until we resolve this with the registrar, I said. This is not exile. This is me taking steps. His mouth tightened. You will cause trouble for the family, he said. I let the warning sit without answering. Sophia put her hand on my forearm, a small, grounding touch. We walked down the gravel path together, and for the first time in certain years my steps felt like decisions I had chosen rather than obligations I had been given. The chapter did not resolve all questions. The registrar's note and the lawyer's admission of Marco's signature reframed an earlier trust decision as an active choice by family members. The twist meant I could not restore my name with a single conversation. I would need documents, witnesses, and an injunction if necessary. The immediate small victory was mine. I had refused to be moved quietly. Between beats the tone shifted from shock to examination to confrontation to step-by-step planning. There were at least 2 clear emotion shifts. Betrayal into anger, then anger into focus and resolve. Each shift showed in my hands how I folded my fingers over the papers, how I removed the ring, how I packed my notebook. Dialogue drove the reveals. When the lawyer showed the trust stamp, the scene turned on the concrete discovery of Marco's signature. When I put the ring on the desk, the climax formed from an action more than an oration. By the end of the chapter, I had left the estate gate with Sophia at my side, the locket in my palm, my notebook in my bag, and a list of things to do. I had a name to call Marco, whom I had only thought of as an uncle at dinners. I had evidence that the decision had been made without my consent. I had an immediate plan. Registrar, Originals Council. The final image of the chapter is not a slogan or an abstract promise. It is a small, precise act. I stepped through the gate, closed it behind me, and handed the list to Sophia. Start with the registrar, she said. I looked down at the locket, then at the list, and then at the house one last time. I did not feel complete. I felt determined in the way a person feels when they have made a choice in front of witnesses. The door shut behind me as I walked toward the street and toward the next concrete steps we would take. I yanked the front door open and found strangers carrying the living room sofa down the steps. Betrayal hit like a physical weight in my stomach. I could not name it anything softer. I grabbed the first mover by the sleeve. Stop those boxes, I said. This is my house. Put it down. The mover paused, glanced at the new brass deadbolt, and kept walking. The house smelled of lemon polish and car exhaust. My hands left wet marks on the banister as I ran down the hall. I thought of the night Luca thrust the packet of papers at me, the thick stack that removed my name from the deeds, and how he had spoken with the same quiet certainty he used for every decision. That memory pressed against the present. A locked door, men who did not know me, a routine turned into a removal. Elena, please. Someone called from the study doorway. Luca stood there in a charcoal coat, sleeves neat, his palms folded. My name as if testing how it would sound when I had less claim to the rooms. My voice shortened. Luca, what are they doing? I demanded. He did not lift his voice. They are moving what I have ordered moved. Luca, let them finish. We will speak later. His jacket smelled like leather and ozone. The air between us felt measured. I folded my hands on the banister and felt the locket against my palm until the metal warmed. Betrayal shaped my next actions. I ran back down the steps and stopped the movers at the curb, standing in the yellow light of the porch lamp. I put the photocopy of the bank timestamp in the foreman's hand because I needed witnesses and because I could not trust the house anymore. Check this, I said. These items belong to me. They were not authorized to be removed. My voice cut across the boxes. A cat skittered from under the porch and vanished into the hedge. The foreman shrugged, the thin professional shrug of someone trained to accept instructions. Orders, he said. From Missa? Moretti, he tapped his clipboard. We have legal paperwork. The word legal cost me a breath. I had to make a decision in front of men who moved furniture for a living, shout, beg, or do something that would make them stop. I chose to do something practical. I walked back inside, opened the study door, and found Luca seated at his desk with a lawyer's brief beside him. The lawyer looked up, expression blank and efficient. Papers lay fanned on the desk, signatures dark at the corners. I placed the photocopy of the timestamp on top. "Luca, these dates are wrong," I said. "This shows the transfer began last month." My hands did not shake. I needed the facts to arrange my next move. The lawyer pushed a slim envelope toward me, as if passing a baton. "The documents are lawful," he said. "The transfer is effective." His voice held no accusation, only procedure. Luca watched me. He pinched the bridge of his nose and then, without looking away, said, "We discussed arrangements." You know why? His mouth was steady. "Elena, stop making this a scene." The sentence was meant to close off any argument. I saw the wound at his temple, the scar I had traced once by accident. It looked small against the tidy set of his jaw. I thought of the first time I signed anything in his name, the small amendment to a will that had felt like an odd paper cut, harmless. I thought of how he had spoken to me about family legacy as though it were a map we both had read. Now the map had a margin with my name crossed out. My fingers tightened around the locket until the chain creased the skin. Sophia arrived the next morning with a thermos and 2 bags of stale croissants. She walked through the front door without hesitation, scanned the living room, and said, "Elena, you look like you swallowed winter." Her voice was bright. She set the thermos down and folded her arms like a person about to do the sensible thing. "Sophia," I said. I told her the basic facts. Movers at midnight, a new lock, the study full of papers. I told her about Luca's calm face. She listened, then unfolded her hands and asked, "Do you have the original deeds?" Her tone made the question a tool, not pity. "No," I said, "not anymore." I felt the statement land on the table like a plate. Sophia sat down opposite me, put her hand over mine, and said, "Then we go through the house. We find whatever you can prove is yours. We call Marco. We call a lawyer. We call anyone who will listen." Her list was a sequence of concrete steps. Each one moved me away from passive loss and toward action. We moved through rooms I had taken for granted. I opened drawers and found old receipts, a photograph of my father on the kitchen counter, a receipt for curtains with my name in my own handwriting. Each found item became evidence. We catalogued a set of small ownerships. The vintage locket, the signed receipt for the piano, a packet of letters in my handwriting stored behind a false panel in the wardrobe. Sophia taped labels to boxes and said, "Put Elena's on top. Do not let anyone touch those boxes." She used my name to make a boundary. At midday I cornered the housekeeper in the servants' corridor. Her hands smelled of starch and lemon. She avoided my eyes at first. When I mentioned the papers, she hesitated and then held out a small envelope with neat handwriting. "I thought you should know," she said. "Mr. Moretti me to prepare this." I couldn't believe it myself. I pried the paper open. An earlier signature date stared back at me, and my name had been crossed out by a mechanical stamp. "This goes back before Luca me anything," I said. My throat felt raw. The housekeeper touched my wrist and said, "Elena, I'm sorry." I didn't know what to do. Her apology came in a small, human shape that altered the story. She supplied not drama but a factual thread. Luca's decision had not been sudden, it had been arranged. Sophia read the envelope over my shoulder and said, "That's enough to file an injunction. Do you want me to call Marco?" Her voice held an impatient accuracy. "Marco can get you copies of bank timestamps and staff rosters. He owes you his silence, if nothing else." She looked at me like someone removing a painful object from a wound. I met Luca at the charity dinner that evening because I needed to force the issue into the light. The hall was dim, amber lighting on long tables, guests moving like practiced players. I stood and opened my hand to the nearest person until a waiter came and placed a plate before me. I stood again, crossed the room, and stopped directly in front of the table where Luca sat. "Luca," I said, and then I held up the photocopy of the bank timestamp. "Do you deny this?" I did not give him time to compose his silence into armor. The guests quieted. Cutlery paused in small fingers. He looked at the paper and at me. "Elena," he said, naming me as if to measure my weight in the room. "We discussed this privately. I did not expect you to use dinner to humiliate me. The word humiliate fell flat among people who were learning to look away from trouble. Humiliate. I echoed, you stripped my name from the house and then had new locks fitted at midnight. That's not humiliation. It's erasure. The room inhaled with us. A woman 2 tables over clutched her napkin. A man I did not recognize cleared his throat. Luca's jaw moved. You should not have spread these documents around the room, he said. You should have come to me. His tone was a demand wrapped in expectation. Elena, handle this quietly. For the family's sake, for our public face. He used the words family and public as if they were shields. I said, Luca, this isn't about face. This is about my name on the deeds. I put the photocopy on the table between us. People glanced at the paper as if it were a stain. The waiter avoided our table, but the head of the charity committee lingered nearby, eyes sharp. After dinner, someone I had not expected intercepted me in the side corridor. Marco, an associate of Luca's who had always been slightly apologetic in his manner, stood with his coat collar up. He pushed a photocopy and a small note across my palm. Elena, he said, and he used my name with the same pitched guilt as the housekeeper. This timestamp was taken 2 weeks before Luca says he initiated the transfer. I thought you should see it. He did not linger. His hand was thermal from the warm corridor lamps. I read the photocopy under the harsh fluorescent nearest the kitchen doors. The date there contradicted the story Luca had given at the study desk. Marco's note said, for you. Don't trust how they tell it. The phrase was not dramatic. It was useful. I folded the paper into my pocket like a tool. When I stopped Luca in the drive under the amber street lamp, he was about to get into his car. His bodyguard stood a few paces away with a radio clipped to his collar. My shoes made soft sounds on the gravel. I stepped forward and put both the photocopy and the locket on the hood of the parked car. Luca, I said, I will file for an injunction. I will not accept being erased without a fight. My voice did not shake. I wanted it to land like a choice rather than a plea. He stared at the items on the car, then at me. For a beat his composure faltered. His fingertips tapped his heavy signet ring. The bodyguard shifted. You will not. Luca began, and then his voice thinned. He had not intended to let anyone see him lose control. We had a rapid exchange then, less theater than negotiation. Luca, stop this, I said. Luca, tell me the truth. When did you sign these? I kept asking until the sentence came out in a private, brittle edge. Elena, he replied. The dates were arranged to protect. He did not finish. The sentence broke on the porch light. His hands rested on the steering wheel of the car as if anchoring himself. I said, Luca, Marco gave me a copy with a different date. The housekeeper gave me a note with a signature from before you told me. You cannot ask me to accept silence now. I felt the power of the evidence as a concrete thing in my pocket. He reached into his coat and set a dossier beside my hand. If you file, he said, there will be a public hearing. There will be testimony. There will be questions you cannot avoid. His words were warnings dressed as concern. He searched my face and then, in a voice that softened, added, Elena, please. Think of the children. Think of what this will do to reputations. The attempt to frame the argument around hypothetical others felt like a last tool. I put my palm flat on the photocopy, then slid the locket into my hand and closed my fingers until the metal bit my skin. I will file, I said. My sentence was short and an action. A motion I made with paper and jewelry, and with the weight of all the small ownerships we had boxed that morning. The bodyguard moved closer. Madam, you should step back. His voice was matter of fact. I did not step back. I put the photocopy into my coat pocket and walked toward the guest room with Sophia behind me, carrying a stack of labeled boxes. The night did something simple. It rearranged the rooms. Staff moved silently, placing certain boxes into a locked closet. Luca retreated into the study and, for the first time I could remember, did not attempt to control the tempo of the house with his stillness. The household shifted its furniture around an absence I could name now. Sophia put a kettle on in the small guest room kitchen and pressed a mug into my hands. You are filing, right? She asked, her voice steady in the small space. I listed the steps I would take. A lawyer's appointment, copies of bank records, witness lists. She nodded and wrote down phone numbers. Her pen left small, precise marks on paper. I sat by the window in the guest room with my worn leather notebook and wrote a list of legal and personal steps. I wrote names, dates, who had seen what, when a lock was changed, who had driven the van. I closed my fingers around the locket and read the first item aloud. File for injunction with timestamp proof. I sounded the action to give it weight. Sophia leaned forward. Call Marco now, she said. Call your lawyer. Bring me the evidence and I will sit in any meeting with you. Her presence was a plan made of human bones and schedules. I did not sleep that night. Dawn seeped in slow and pale through the curtains. I labeled the boxes again, affixed streaming tape across the seams, and made 2 copies of the photocopy Marco had given me. The house felt rearranged not only in objects but in the paths we now took through it. I thought about choices. I had lived for years in rooms where small freedoms had been traded for peace. Agreeing to a particular dinner guest, letting a phrase go unsaid, signing a favor that would become a habit, I had mistaken those quiet concessions for kindness. Now each concession read as a ledger entry. Sophia packed the last labeled box into her Kalina. She said, "You are not alone in this," she the words plainly. I watched her strap the trunk and felt gratitude as a practical thing. A friend with car keys and a phone and the willingness to keep showing up. At 9 a.m. I called the lawyer whose name Sophia had given. We scheduled the injunction. I described the stamped photocopy, the envelope from the housekeeper, Marco's photocopy. The lawyer asked for originals and witness statements. I made a list. I spoke, step by step, into the phone until the list was a path I could follow. Before I left the house, I took the locket and slid it onto my finger, not as jewelry but as a marker. I closed my hand around it and felt the metal edge press into my palm. I placed the folded list into an envelope, wrote the lawyer's name on the front, and sealed it. Sophia wrapped the envelope in a brown paper bag and said, "I'll take this to the firm. I will bring back anything they say. Do not let anyone else move those boxes." She pronounced the instruction as if it were a fact of physics. She left with the labeled boxes and the envelope. The guest room felt smaller and steadier when she left. I sat on the narrow window seat and watched the garden with a list in my lap. Each item on the list was a decision I could perform. I closed the notebook and put it in the drawer beside the bed. I folded my fingers around the locket and then, in a small, decisive movement, slid it under the mattress to the side of the bed. I did not put it away as a relic. I put it where I could find it by feel. The act felt deliberate rather than symbolic. Outside, a car door slammed. I walked to the door and opened it. A paper, clipped stack lay on the doormat. It was from the law firm. The injunction forms to be signed and the time for the preliminary hearing. I picked up the papers, felt the weight of them, and then looked back at the house, the rooms that had contained me, and at the guest room where I would sleep that night. I slid the first form into my bag, closed the door, and walked toward the gate with the locket still warm in my hand. The house behind me did not change shape, but my route through it had been redrawn. I walked away with the envelope and the papers, not because I had recovered something whole, but because I had made the first series of practical choices that would make a defense possible. Sophia's car pulled away as I reached the curb. I folded the list inside my notebook, closed the cover, and pressed my thumb over the page. The chapter of the night ended with paper in my bag and the small metal warmth of the locket in my palm. When I reached the corner, I stopped and looked back once more. A gardener had moved a wheelbarrow along the drive. The gate was closed, the new lock glinting in the morning sun. I put the notebook back under my arm, stepped onto the street, and walked toward the law office. The movement was the next action. I had a list, a photocopy, witnesses, and a lawyer appointment. That was enough for now. I folded my fingers around the locket again and felt its cool edge as I left. He placed the packet on the table with a single, deliberate motion, and the room fell into a new shape around that paper. Betrayal sat heavy in my throat before I could speak. The word arrived as a physical taste. "Alina," my cousin murmured behind a fan of napkins. The charity program on stage paused. Glasses quieted. The lawyer at Luca's side tapped a page and said, "These documents formalize the transfer." The transfer was not a phrase. It was a motion, an index finger pointing at my name and crossing it out. The lights over the marble hall caught on pearls and a chandelier. I felt the weight of eyes, not curiosity but measurement, counting which alliances remained useful. I reached for the papers because my hands moved before my head could order them still. My fingers brushed the envelope and the corner of a line I already half expected to read. A clause removing me from family holdings. That is what the moment was about, loss made visible among people who had come to watch an auction and stayed for the speeches. Sophia arrived at my elbow breathing fast, her scarf undone, and she said, "Elena, sit down. Don't make a scene." Her hand closed on my arm the way she always prevents me from walking into a busy street. I heard Luca's voice from the days, low enough for the microphones but clear enough for the nearest rows. "This is to protect the family's interests," he said. The words landed as if they had been practiced in an office with leather chairs and a locked drawer. I did not answer immediately because a part of me kept counting. Who was watching? Who would benefit? Who had signed? My immediate feeling, betrayal, shifted to suspicion as I folded the packet away to hide its front page from curious fingers. Sophia leaned close and whispered, "Someone organized this. It's not a mistake." Her eyes scanned the tablecloths, the waiters, the guest ledger. I nodded because my mouth refused to form more than the shapes of disbelief. Guests muttered. A cousin touched his wine to his lips and did not drink. Comment drifted. Too private for a public event. He should have handled it at home. The murmur grew like static until it matched the band, but louder. Someone at the next table said, "We all assumed Elena handled that," and the rest stifled. A woman 2 rows back cleared her throat in sympathy and then waited for the next course. Sophia guided me away toward the corridor where coat-check girls had left half their station in disarray. She used the same quick tone she always used at coffee. Practical and immediate. "Elena, look at the guest ledger. The manager keeps it by the coat room. There may be a note. There may be a signature you recognize." She had the look of someone opening a door she already knew might be locked. We moved through guests whose smiles thinned when they saw us. A waiter bumped my elbow and apologized with a bow. I watched my reflection in the black lacquer of a piano for a second. My silk dress folded the light. My hands kept touching the thin gold band on my finger the way a habit protects you from doing something braver. At the ledger table, Sophia flipped the page with one finger and found, tucked under the guest name list, a small handwritten note. A company name and a signature that was not family. "Sophia, who is that?" I asked. I forced my voice to keep its edges flat so no one listening could read my fear into it. She read the name out loud, slow. "Bianca Holdings, Shell subsidiary. Signed by Marco Ricci." Her jaw tightened a fraction. "That's not our name," she said. Sophia's discovery forced a new shift in me. Suspicion became clarity. The word betrayal no longer sat like a soft bruise. It pointed at a mechanism. This was redistribution, not a private argument. I felt a sting that was not only personal, a realization that the removal was planned to be visible, to make a statement in front of witnesses. We were not safe in the corridor. A cousin who had watched too closely waved a small hand and said, "We all thought you'd be fine, Elena. Luca has always handled these matters." I felt the glance move from my face to my hands to the band and then to Luca, who stood at the balcony like a statue of policy and measured firmness. He wore navy, his signet glinted. He did not smile. "Luca," I said when I found him on the terrace a few minutes later. The city lay below in banded light. "Why did you make it public?" My voice was short, my hands folded in front of me like someone tying a small knot. He looked at me the way he always does when a question requires no immediate answer, long, deliberate, weighing. "I am protecting the family image," he said. "Some things must be arranged in plain sight to discourage rumor." The sentence had the texture of a boardroom demand. He kept his fingertips together, in that pause he uses when he wants to appear steady. "You removed me in front of everyone," I said. I pressed the packet against my palm hidden inside my clutch. "Who does this protect?" I sounded too loud and it landed on a waiter carrying champagne. Luca did not flinch. "There are beneficiaries that cannot be listed at this moment. It is necessary," he did not add, "at the cost of you." He made the implication and left it to hang in the terrace air. Close to the coat room, Sophia returned to the ledger and rifled through the event manager's stack of receipts and notes. She kept her shoulders low as if carrying a private burden so that no one would mistake her search for a scene. I watched her finger stop on a thin card, then point. "Elena, this dates 3 weeks ago. There was a meeting. This name Luciano Vale appears as an account holder." She pronounced the name like a stone dropped into a bowl. Ripples moved outward. It's not a family name either. This isn't a one-off. Her voice shifted from concerned to determined. There was a small hard set at the corner of her mouth that I knew meant she had decided. Do something now. She held my hand and pulled me away. Go home with me after this, she said. We'll look in Luca's study for signatures. If someone signed without your knowledge, there will be originals there. She did not ask. She planned. I saw the beginnings of a plan and felt something like relief and dread colliding. We returned to the guests. The band had resumed. People who had witnessed the exchange pretended to enjoy the music. I moved through them like someone wearing borrowed skin. Every smile averted my direction. An aunt poured me a drink and said nothing. I tasted citrus and felt the edge of anger, my next emotion, indignation. Sophia and I left the gala before the speeches concluded. The estate service corridors smelled of polished stone and coffee. We moved quickly, the heels of our shoes measuring the tile. At the study door I hesitated. The lock had been changed before. I remembered the night they changed the locks, when movers had taken furniture down the steps in the dark, and I had grabbed a man's sleeve and told him to stop. That image, hands on a sofa, a mover's surprised face, reminded me that this was not the first time my house had been contested. Sophia slipped a small tool from her clutch. It will take only a moment, she said. She never called it theft. She called it retrieval. We agreed on the risk with the economy of two women who have spoken about privacy over coffee for years. I heard my own breathing in the quiet lobby outside the study and felt fear sharpen into focus. Inside Luca's study the light was lower, a desk lamp carving a rectangle on top of polished oak. Leather-bound volumes lined the shelves. I moved to the drawers and found one locked. My fingers found a seam where paper could slip. I worked the lock with a small flat instrument and the drawer opened with a soft click. There were envelopes stamped with dates, signatures in looped scripts. I thumbed through and found a sealed envelope that had both family and corporate stamps. When I slid my finger beneath the flap, a movement at the doorway froze me. A security aide, his silhouette framed in the corridor light, paused like a sentinel. My heart thudded. For a second my pulse replaced any clear thought. The security aide called, "Madam, is everything all right?" He sounded neutral in the way of someone trained to diffuse alarm. I straightened and kept the envelope tucked under my palm as if it were a letter I had brought to a friend. "Yes," I said. I touched my locket to appear distractedly sentimental. "I'm looking for a receipt. I think someone left it under the papers earlier." My voice was steady because I had practiced the tone of small domestic confusion 1,000 times. He nodded and left. My breathing eased, but only slightly. The presence of someone at the threshold placed a thin danger on the air. I slid the sealed envelope into my clutch. I told myself the risk was reasonable. The document would prove the transfer was part of a plan, not a spontaneous act. A door clicked and then the room filled with a sound I had come to know as the shape of the house. The soft echo of Luca's steps. He did not announce himself. He entered the study and stopped under the lamp. His back was to me, the corner of his jacket catching the light. I realized I had not closed the drawer. The envelope showed a corner, then the rest of the papers lay fanned like a bad hand on the desk. "Elena," his voice reduced the distance, and then increased it again. He did not move to close the door. "Why are you in my study?" he asked. The words between us became quick, sharp exchanges. He was composed. "I was not Luca. These documents, don't call me that here," he said. "This is not the place for questions." His tone was a wall. "You announced my removal in front of our family," I said. "Who benefits?" I lifted the corner of the envelope so he would see the corporate stamp. He came forward 2 steps and placed his palms flat on the desk, on the papers. "You saw what I arranged," he said. "You saw me trying to prevent rumor. I made a choice that keeps the family secure. I will not explain more in front of staff. If you read that document, you will only inflame the house." His voice narrowed. The room tightened in pressure. My next emotional move was fear. Fear for what his control might cost me if I pushed. I still moved. "Who controls Bianchi?" I asked. "Why would the deeds be moved to a shell company?" He tapped his ring twice. "There are names best not aired now." "Elena, please." He cut himself off and then spoke with a clarity that felt like a blade. "If you make trouble, you will harm more than yourself. If you go public, you will fracture what remains. His eyes softened in a way he has reserved for private moments. I'm trying to protect you, in my way. That softening was its own twist. Sophia had told me betrayal. Here was an argument that protection and erasure wore the same coat. The conversation shifted my feelings again. Indignation folded into confusion. The envelope in my clutch thudded against my thigh like a small heart. The lawyer who had accompanied Luca to the gala appeared at the doorway then, a man who never seemed to blink. He slid into the room with the practiced gait of someone who carries documents like currency. "Mr. Moretti, the guests are asking. We handle this here, Luca." He turned to me with a look that asked whether I would step aside. The look wanted submission. I kept my hands folded around the envelope and stepped back. A rapid exchange followed. 3 quick lines that clipped like a snapped thread. "Luca, you can't do this in front of people," I said. "You won't make this worse by searching through what isn't yours," he replied. "This was not mine to give away," I said. Sophia's voice came from the corridor sharp as a bell. "Elena, they're leaving. We have to move now." "He'll have a copy with the lawyer." She stepped into the study, eyes hard. "Take what you can. We'll go." The argument accelerated into movement. I shoved my clutch into a coat pocket. I ran a finger along the envelope and convinced myself that stealing a page was not theft but evidence retrieval. Luca reached for the desk and his fingertips grazed my wrist. For a beat I thought he might stop me physically. Instead he said, "If you take anything, you will ruin whatever leverage we still have. Are you sure you want that?" I heard the words as an attempt to frighten me. I answered with the small, steady action of someone who had practiced courage in private. I slipped a single folded page from the envelope into my palm and folded it into my locket for a second, then into my sleeve. The motion was tiny. It was precise, it was mine. The security aide returned, then paused in the doorway. "Everything all right?" he asked again. He was closer now. The threat of discovery rose sharp like a metallic note. I met his eyes and said, "Yes." "Thank you." My voice did not betray the way my fingers tightened around the paper. Sophia briskly steered me toward the service stairwell. "Move," she said. Her voice was fast, clipped. It carried the electricity of someone with a route already mapped. We slid down stone steps behind the staff quarters into a waiting car where she had someone idling. The scuffle felt like a small earthquake. A knock of palms, a rustle of fabric, shoes on tile. When the car eased away from the estate, I realized I was shaking enough that my teeth clicked. Sophia drove with one hand on the wheel and the other on my knee. She kept glancing toward the rearview mirror as if expecting a motorcade to appear. At a side street we stopped. Dawn was growing pale at the edges of the buildings. I opened my hand and unfolded the page I had taken. The type on it listed names and percentages. One line listed a beneficiary I recognized. The name belonged to a company connected to Luca's associates, not family. The signature was there and dated 3 days before the gala. My stomach dropped. This was not a quarrel. This was a reallocation. I touched my locket, then smoothed the paper with the flat of my palm. My emotions tightened. From fear to a cold clarity, I knew what I would do next. I would not yell in the hall or make a scene at the charity event. I would plan. I would find the document trail. I would not erase the tenderness that remained between us, but I would stop being erased. Sophia watched me and asked, "What will you do?" "I will show this to someone who cannot be bought," I said. The words were precise because I needed them to be. "I'll get a lawyer who won't take orders from Luca's friends. We'll file an inquiry. We'll force the signatures to be explained." My voice gained a small hardness. I felt something shift into resolve. She nodded and slid a small leather notebook across the seat. "Write names, dates, times, who was there. I will call Marta. My cousin still runs a firm downtown. She won't be part of their circle." Sophie's actions made the plan real. Her finger tapped a name on her phone screen. She spoke the way someone sets a chain in motion. Direct, efficient. We made a list there under the orange glow of a street lamp. The car smelled of cold leather and coffee. The paper in my hand rustled as I wrote. Bianchi Holdings, Luciano Vale, Marco Ricci, date 3 weeks prior. For every line I wrote, I felt a small control return. But the chapter did not close without a final surprise. As I folded the page and slid it into my notebook, my phone buzzed in my purse. A number I didn't recognize flashed, an unknown contact with no name. I did not answer immediately. Sophia's hand hovered over the screen. "Don't pick up unknowns right now," she said. "Let it go to voicemail." "We need to move." I let it go to voicemail. The message that arrived 2 minutes later was a single sentence I could not yet place. "Be careful who you trust at the gala." The voice was low, hurried, and unnamed. My breath stalled. The caution in the voice changed the geometry of our small victory. Someone else had noticed, or someone else wanted to warn me. Sophia's jaw tightened. "Who was it?" she asked. I checked the incoming number for a trace and found nothing but a routed line. I slid the phone back into my bag and closed it with a small click. The car lights traced our rear view as another vehicle passed and then faded. I touched the locket that had once been a private thing and now served as a hiding place for a page. I felt the metal cool against my skin and imagined for a moment the confrontation in the study. Luca's hand on the desk, his voice lowered. The memory was not a poetic blur. I could see the scratches on the oak and the smudge of a coffee ring. Those concrete details steeled me. I felt the final shift, from confusion to an actionable determination. We arranged our next moves in the car. Call Marta, photocopy the page, get a sworn affidavit, keep the evidence duplicated, avoid moving in public alone. Sophia spoke line items in quick order. I agreed, and my agreement was the work of rebuilding a practical center. When we stepped out into the pale morning, I folded the notebook into my bag and felt the paper's corner press into my fingers like a promise. Sophia touched my forearm. "We'll be careful," she said. Before we left the curb, a delivery van rolled by and stopped at the estate gates. A man in a uniform stepped down and carried a small package toward the front doors. For a moment I thought it was nothing. Then I saw the driver glance toward our car, and then lift his head to the estate house, as if checking for a signal. I said nothing aloud, but the detail lodged in me. Someone was still moving pieces while we made our plans. I slid the notebook into my pocket and closed my fingers around the page I had stolen. I placed the page back into my locket and felt the metal close over it. That simple physical act resolved the small theft into an intention. I would not vanish. I would not allow paperwork to be the only evidence of my life here. When Sophia started the engine, I watched the estate recede and thought of the gala lights and the hush of assembled guests. The lawyer had returned to the house with a neutral expression, and Luca had remained composed. The confrontation had been made in the private room between us and his lawyer. The public had witnessed only the packet on the table. I had taken a single page in public spaces. I had made a small, concrete theft to prove the larger theft. We drove toward the city and toward Marta's office, toward the start of a process that would drag signatures into light. I felt a tightness in my jaw, not theatrical but functional, a readiness to argue, to sign, to demand accounts. I did not stand on the balcony and wait for permission. I planned. At the stoplight, Sophia took my hand and said, "Alina, you did the right thing." I looked at her and said nothing for a second, then answered, "I won't let them move me like a piece in a ledger." The sentence was short and practical. It was not a scream or a vow, it was an instruction. We turned onto the main road where morning traffic slowed and the city was beginning to stir. I kept my hand in my lap over the locket and the folded page inside it. The chapter closed on a simple action. I opened my notebook, wrote the time and place of the gala, wrote Luca's exact phrasing from the terrace, then closed the book and slid it into my coat. The notebook's leather felt heavy and reassuring. Sophia started the car radio softly, and a news brief from a low power station filled the car with a voice unrelated to our plans. It reported a charity auction's final totals with the same detachment we had heard earlier. I turned my face toward the window and watched the city take light the way a hand takes ink from a stamp. I felt the promise of a process, legal steps, copies, witnesses settling into motion. The last thing I did before we pulled into Marta's parking lot was look at Sophia and say, "Let's not let them scare us into silence." She nodded, and then a knock came at the car window from a municipal parking officer asking for a permit. The interruption was mundane and immediate, the kind of detail that would ground the day to follow. I rolled the window down and produced the permit from my coat pocket. The external world resumed. We stepped out into the morning and walked toward an office where I would start to name names and make the paper speak for me. I pushed the study door hard enough that it hit the wall and did not wait for a reply. The lawyer was standing inside with his hands folded over a sealed envelope. Luca sat behind the desk and looked up without surprise. Betrayal ran under my voice before I could shape the words. "What is this?" I said. My fingers were already on the edge of the envelope. My throat was tight, and the word betrayal made me walk faster, closer to the desk. The lawyer, Marco De Luca, tried to step forward. He held his papers with both hands like a shield. "Elena, Luca." He did not stand. He did not reach for me. Not now. I pulled the envelope toward me and set it down, the seal catching the light from the fireplace. The seal had the family crest. My name was on top, printed on a typed line. The word that mattered was not hidden. I felt the shape of it in my mouth. Removed. I forced the word out. "Why is my name crossed off the deeds?" Marco cleared his throat. "There are legal reasons." Threats were made, a transfer was advised. His voice tried to be steady and small and technical. Luca rested his fingertips together, watching me. The arrangement of his hands had always been a way to delay anything he didn't want to say. I stepped around his desk. My shoes scuffed the Persian runner. I put the envelope on top of the deeds folder and slid it open. The printed clause sat like an instruction. Transfer of ownership. It had a signature that looked like mine. My fingers found the faint indentation of pen. The paper under my fingertips was smooth except where someone had pressed a different initial in the margin. Sofia burst in before Marco could finish his sentence. She had a receipt in one hand and a phone in the other. Her scarf was still wrapped tight. She had been out searching. She walked straight to me and held out the crumpled paper. "A mover says someone paid cash to change locks at 11 p.m. Sofia, voice clipped. "They gave me a receipt and a name no one recognizes. It matches a transfer on the bank statement linked to the estate account." She looked at me. "Elena, look." I took the receipt. The numbers were plain. The transfer reference was stamped faintly. Sofia's arrival pushed the room into a new shape. Arguments had to be followed by facts now. Marco set down his folder. "I advised Luca because a claim against the family could have been costly." You advised him to erase me," I said. My hands trembled enough that I set the receipt down twice and had to straighten it. Him to take my name off legal papers." Luca's face did not change. "I told you the house needed protection," he said. His voice stayed low. "There were threats. I made a decision to keep the estate intact." Sofia stepped between us. Luca's name once, clear and not pleading. "Luca, did you sign for that transfer?" Her eyes were quick. She held mine and would not let me look away. He opened his mouth. He closed it. The pause lasted the length of the fireplace embers settling. I went to the desk drawers and opened them one by one. My hands moved faster than my thoughts. I knew where Marco kept the notary files. While Luca watched, I slid my hand into the last drawer and found a folded page pressed behind an old appointment book. It was notarized and stamped, but the signature line had a different initial placed in the margin beside my name. "This signature looks like mine," I said. And then I read the name out loud because reading something made it more real. "But the initial is not mine." "Who signed this?" Marco's fingers tightened on the folder. "We used a proxy for the notary on short notice. It was recommended." There was pressure. There was a threat. Pressure from whom? I asked. My voice rose. Betrayal shifted under that single question into confusion. I did not know whether to be angrier at the forge or at whoever had forced the hand that chosen to forge. Sofia put a palm on my forearm. The contact was small but steady. "Elena, there's more. I found a photo. Someone delivered an envelope to the movers. Look." She handed me her phone. The image was grainy, an angle from a street camera. A man in a dark coat passed a thick envelope to someone carrying a moving box. The man had his face turned away, but he wore a watch like Luca's and moved like someone who did not want to be seen. Sofia had circled a bank transfer number on a separate screenshot. This transfer came from an account tied to the estate. "Sofia," I checked the reference. "It traces back to your accounts, Luca. This looks like it came from inside." Luca's jaw tightened. Those transactions were authorized to cover threats. "You must understand what I was facing." He spoke slowly, like someone giving a lecture. "Explain the forgery, then," I said. My voice had a new edge. The emotion changed. From betrayal to suspicion. Suspicion moved my hands. It made me list items I would need to prove the claim in court. I reached for the phone and took screenshots of the notary page, the receipt, the photo. Marco's face shifted. He moved closer. There was an ultimatum. If we did not complete this transfer, a claim would have been enforced in a way that would cost the family the estate. I advised Luca to avoid public litigation. It was to prevent a crisis. His fingers were thinner when he spoke quickly. Did anyone threaten you specifically? I asked. He hesitated. They sent an envelope. It contained a demand and a reference that implied legal action. The exact origin was unclear. I recommended a private settlement to secure legal title. A private settlement that erased me, I said. The room tightened around the word. I could feel anger stepping forward again, anger that would not let me be small. Sophia pushed her phone toward Marco. Then tell us why the bank transfer came from a number linked to Luca's account. She did not ask politely. Marco's eyes slid to Luca. There are transfers from the estate account to pay intermediaries. I authorized some. I signed approvals at his instruction. Luca looked at me and said, I wanted to keep you safe. I made the choice I believed least harmful. He did not call my name. He did not reach for my hand. I moved around the desk until I stood in front of him. The study felt smaller now because the truth had been dragged into the light. You made a choice that erased me, I said. You made it without me. He looked at Sophia. Elena, you would have made things worse if you had known. You do not understand the family liabilities. Don't talk to me like I'm a child, I said. You called me your wife, not your secret. You made a decision about my life in a sealed envelope without me. The argument accelerated. Words snapped back and forth. For 3 minutes the room was a short, sharp exchange. Luca explained the initial in the notary file. I demanded. It was an administrative initial. The notary used a deputy. I signed the authorization. He tapped his signet ring against the wood once. I can show you the authorization. Sophia cut in. Show us the transfer logs then. Open your planner. Luca, show us the account entries you authorized. He hesitated. The hesitation fell like a breath held too long. Marco's hands folded near his chest. If this goes public, it invites claims. My recommendation was to keep it in-house and resolve privately. That was when I felt the shift again, suspicion bending into something rawer. Fear. Fear of what public claim might do, fear of what Luca had protected against, and fear that his protection had been theft in another form. My mouth was dry. My hands clenched around the edge of the desk. Show me the authorization now, I said, or I will copy these documents and leave. I will go to Sophia's and I will call the firm I trust. I won't let this sit in your office. Sophia's voice came soft but firm. Elena, I'll stay with you. We will take copies and we will file a challenge. We will not let this be papered over. Sophia looked at Marco. Give us a minute alone, Luca. I want to see the authorization you referenced. She did not ask. She ordered politely. He stood slowly. He walked to the sideboard and opened his planner. He flipped pages with a deliberate slowness. He found a set of handwritten notes and a signed form. He handed them to Marco, who reached for them like a man passing a small obligation. Sophia leaned close and read aloud the lines that mattered. She named dates and amounts. She compared the authorization signatures to the forged initial. Her voice stayed level. Each factual sentence shifted the room. The lawyer's shoulders moved under the weight of specifics. This reference number on the bank transfer ties to an account controlled by the estate. Sophia. But the payment chain includes an unlisted intermediary. Who is the intermediary? Marco swallowed. He was introduced as a security consultant. We used him for threat assessment. I did not check the intermediary's identity thoroughly. I regret that now. Sophia's eyes hardened. Marco, that is not decent procedure. You should have verified identity checks. You should have kept Elena informed. He looked at Luca. I took counsel from him. I thought it safer. The accusation returned to Luca like a thrown coin. He reached for a justification that did not land. It was risk management. It was protection. Protection by erasure is theft, Luca, I said. My voice no longer shook. Anger had shaped itself into resolve. You cannot claim to protect someone and then remove their legal rights without consent. He let his hands fall to his sides. The silence after that held the weight of a decision pending. He spoke once more, quiet. I was afraid. The confession landed like a door closing. For a moment I only heard the fireplace. Then something shifted in his expression. The heavy set of control loosened, revealing a deeper strain. Fear that someone would take the estate by force. Fear of failing the family he had vowed to lead. Sophia's tone changed, and it marked the second emotional turn in the room. She stopped interrogating and asked a practical question. Who threatened you? Who delivered the envelope? Marco's voice dropped. The envelope was anonymous. The demand cited a claim that could be initiated by a creditor with a manufactured lien. We wanted to prevent litigation that could force a sale during breach proceedings. Then prove it, I said. Prove the threat existed. Show me the chain of communications that demanded this transfer. Luca stared at me. His hand tightened around the planner. There were phone calls. I kept logs. Sophia reached into her bag and produced a printed screenshot. A bank transfer trail that included a small deposit to an account with a surname I did not recognize and a reference that matched the receipt from the movers. The evidence changed the scene again. It forced a different explanation. Marco's mouth opened. He took a breath and stepped forward. There is also one more item. I found a signed letter in a safety deposit that referenced a prior settlement. It names a third party by an initial. It suggests the threat may have been orchestrated to force a transfer. The new detail hit me like a bruise. A manufactured threat, a setup using forged documents. The emotional shift deepened. Suspicion to anger to a growing clarity that the betrayal might be wider than Luca's choice. Show me that letter, I said. My voice was steady. Marco reached for a cabinet and retrieved a locked folder. He unlocked it with his key. The paper inside was folded with care. He handed it to me. The handwriting was large and precise. It named a sum and a demand, and it used language aimed at legal coercion. It included an initial that matched the forged marginal initial on the notarized page. Sophia read it aloud. It states a conditional claim and notes a settlement would avoid public litigation. It gives a bank reference. The signature is abbreviated. It looks planned, so someone engineered this, I said. The word engineered removed the last of my uncertainty. I could point a direction now. Someone wanted the house transferred and used my name as cover. Luca's shoulders drooped. He looked at Marco and then at me. I thought I was choosing the lesser harm. I thought I could control it. A rapid exchange followed. 3 short lines of argument that compressed time. You controlled nothing. Sophia, you chose alone, I said. We tried to avoid worse exposure, Luca. The exchange ended with the longest silence since I had entered. The climax of the night lay ahead. I had the forged deed and the letter. I had the mover's receipt and the bank screenshot. The evidence forced Luca into a corner where his authority could not hold. I laid the forged deed on the desk flat. I pushed it toward him. Explain this signature, I said. I kept my voice level and direct. He closed his eyes for a beat. When he opened them, something in him had shifted from control to fatigue. I signed the authorization to use discretion, he said. I authorized Marco to secure the transfer privately. I never expected this level of forgery. I never expected my family to be used. You authorized the pathway. I said. You did not stop it. You did not tell me. Nothing. Silence stretched and then broke with a sound that was not in any of us. The study clock, chiming midnight. The chime felt like a boundary. It made decisions unavoidable. I grabbed my bag and Sophia moved to the desk to gather copies. We will take photos and go now, she said. We will get legal counsel first thing. We'll file an urgent challenge. Marco stood. He spoke more softly. If you file publicly, you will invite scrutiny. There may be claims against the estate that escalate. I cannot ethically advise you to proceed without counsel. Sophia turned to him. Then help us prepare a record. Help Alina document the chain of events. If you cared for the family, you'd help make this right. The lawyer's mouth tightened. He took the folder back and began to photocopy pages, hands moving with quick efficiency. The action changed the mood again. From confrontation to paperwork, from accusation to necessary steps. I folded the forged deed and slid it into an envelope. I placed the receipt and the bank screenshots beside it. My fingers moved with a purpose I had not felt in weeks. The emotion that had driven me into the study had become something like resolve. That resolve did not promise fireworks or speeches. It promised actions. Sophia found a pen and a blank page in the planner. She wrote while Marco fed papers into the photocopier. List of exhibits, she said as she wrote. 1. Forged deed. 2. Mover receipt. 3. Transfer screenshot. 4. Anonymous demand letter. 5. Notary deputy initial discrepancy. She read the list aloud and ticked boxes as if we were building evidence to a case. Luca watched the page. He did not touch it. He watched like a man watching someone else prepare his fate. I felt a complicated knot of pity and anger. The pity lasted one breath. Then I asked the question that stopped him: who benefits if the house is transferred out of joint title? Who gets control? He looked away. There are family holdings that would consolidate under a single trustee. There are partners who would be spared public exposure if we consolidated. Name them, I said. He hesitated and then said one name, slowly, a name I had heard only in passing at family dinners. The name changed things. It introduced the possibility that the betrayal was not merely a protective act, but a consolidation of power within the family's inner circle. Sophia's eyes narrowed. We will need to subpoena account records and contact those partners, she said. We will need to speak to a litigation attorney first thing. Marco placed the photostated pages and the list in my hands. I will prepare a notarized chain of custody for these documents. I will confirm the photocopies match originals. His tone had shifted to practical care. He was performing repair. I stood at the doorway as Sophia put a coat on me. I looped the thin gold wedding band around my finger twice and felt its small weight. I slid the envelope with the evidence into my bag. The book of the planner was open on the desk. Luca closed it slowly. He my name that time. Elena, it was not soft. It was a small call. I thought I was protecting us. I made a choice. I made the choice without you. I looked at him. I held the notary copy in one hand and the photocopies in the other. The fear that had moved through him had been the reason he acted. The fear had not absolved his choice. Sophia placed a hand on my shoulder. Let's go, she said. We walked out of the study together. The front door was already unlocked. The mover's truck was long gone. Outside, the estate lights glowed along the drive. I did not look back until the sedan's engine started. In the driveway, I put my bag on the passenger seat and closed the door with a firm click. By the time we pulled away, the page of exhibits was in Sophia's lap and my phone had copies of every page. The night smelled of cold stone and wet leaves. I kept my hands folded in my lap. Betrayal had set the motion. Suspicion had forced action. Fear had explained motives. Resolve made the next step clear. I wrote in my worn leather notebook later that night in Sophia's kitchen. The page has short lines. Who to call, which lawyers, what records to request. My handwriting was steady. I held the small vintage locket in my left hand and traced the edge with my thumb. The locket had been with me through more than this year. It was a physical thing that connected me to a woman I wanted to recover, the woman who would fight with evidence rather than plead with silence. Sophia made coffee. She set a handmade ceramic mug in front of me and sat down. You did the right thing coming in here, she said. You found the documents. You did not let them close the door. I put the locket back into my palm and then into my pocket. I am tired of being surprised by decisions I did not make. I said, I want to know what we will do next. Sophia read the list I had started. Call Marriott, Cantrell and Rise in the morning. She takes urgent property cases. She named steps and phone numbers with concise certainty. Her plan made the next day feel practical and possible. We arranged to meet a lawyer at 9 a.m. We agreed to file for an emergency injunction if Marco could not produce a satisfactory chain of custody for the originals. We planned to request bank records and to issue a preservation letter to the intermediary accounts. Each step narrowed the problem into tasks. I slept on Sophia's couch with my coat folded under my head. When I woke before dawn, I held the photocopies in my hands and read them again. The forged initials looked small and deliberate on the page. The mover's receipt had an address that matched a shell company. The anonymous demand letter was blunt in its language. The evidence no longer felt like a rumor. It read like a case. At first light, I packed the documents into a separate folder and slid them into my bag. Sophia drove me to a quiet cafe where I could call the attorney. I called Maria and explained facts in short sentences. I named the exhibits. I asked for an immediate consultation. Maria questions and set an appointment. When I hung up, I felt the final emotion of the chapter settle into place. A brittle steadiness. It was not triumph. It was not a vow. It was the hard, clear business of taking steps. My name had been crossed off paper, but I was not erased from the record of events. I had evidence, witnesses, and a route forward. That afternoon I sent Luca an email listing the exhibits we had and requesting his formal explanation. I copied Marco and included Sophia's account of how she had found the receipt. I pressed send and closed my laptop. The action was small. The consequence would be large. At dusk, I stood at the kitchen sink in Sophia's apartment and watched the city light hit the rim of a glass. I thought of the study clock striking midnight and the chime that had made choices unavoidable. I folded my hands, felt the locket in my pocket, and finally spoke the one line that had been building since the door blew open. I will challenge this transfer. I said out loud to the room, I will file for a temporary injunction in the morning. Sophia looked up from her mug. Then we move. I walked out to the stairwell and paused on the landing. My hand touched the railing. I did not make a speech. I took the photocopies from my bag and put them into a sealed envelope addressed to Maria Cantrell. I wrote the time on the outside. The final beat of the night was practical, small, and undeniable. I left the envelope on the kitchen counter. Sophia closed the door behind me with a soft click. We drove away with the photocopies in tow and the plan forming step by step. The estate's lights receded behind the trees. The study's oak door remained shut. I did not know yet whether this chapter would end in court or in a quieter settlement. I only knew that the papers were copied, the chain had begun, and the next morning a lawyer would read our list and act. The car's indicator blinked once as we turned onto the main road and the engine rose. I put my hand on the locket without thinking and felt its small, worn hinge against my palm. That hinge was the exact place I kept my name intact. The car moved forward. I pushed the car door closed and cold rain hit the amber light over the driveway. Luca stood in the pool of that light and put his hand on the gate, blocking me. Betrayal sat under my ribs like a stone, and I named it aloud before he could untangle his expression. "Where are you going, Elena?" he asked. The question was small and absolute, and it made the stakes clear. He was trying to decide what I would be allowed to do tonight. I did not look away from his hand on the gate. I pulled the thin gold band toward me with my thumb until the metal bit at my skin. The ring was a small, physical proof of months of decisions pulled away from my hands. I felt suspicion settle into my bones, and that suspicion turned into a slow, hot clarity. This marriage had begun passing control in papers and signatures, not words. I thought of the movers from the other night, and the way strangers had carried the sofa down the steps, of how I had grabbed a sleeve and said, "Stop those boxes." That memory came sharp. The sofa's leather scraping the banister, the men's faces blank, the lock changed before I had a key. Luca's jaw held its practiced calm. He had a way of looking at me that kept his voice measured and his meaning contained. "You leaving now?" he said with a quiet that meant accusation. I should have stayed inside. I should have let the rain be an excuse to not choose. Instead, I stepped forward, set my palm soaked against the gate and answered, "I'm going to Sophia's," I said. "I need a lawyer's contact, and I need time to think outside this house." My voice did not shake. Outside, the streetlight threw rain in molten lines across the pavement. Luca's eyes narrowed, and for an instant the silence between us was a negotiation. He looked at my hand where the wedding band pressed into skin. "This is reckless," he said. "We agreed we'd present a united front tonight at the gala. Signing now would—" He stopped, which was always his way of forcing me to fill the silence with surrender. I did not fill it. "We did not agree to strip me of my decisions," I said. "We did not agree to a clause that takes my power away." The word clause landed like a click. He glanced toward the house where the foyer light had been left on the console table. The night held a different kind of weight now. Legal paper and signatures had become a physical trap. Sophia's car light appeared down the hedged walkway like an answering flare. She stepped out under the ambers and crossed to us, with a ceramic mug still warm in her hands. "Elena," she said without preface, and then she slid a small, damp envelope across the gate into my palm. Rain had softened the edges, but the paper inside was intact. "Open it inside," she said. "Don't talk here." Her voice was roughened by urgency. She had the expression of someone who had rehearsed this exact interruption many times. I held the envelope and felt the weight of another decision. Betrayal had guided me out of the car and into confrontation. Doubt moved next. Did I have grounds to challenge what Luca had signed? Did I have proof he intended to cut me off? Doubt became a focused question, and I answered it by stepping back into the dim foyer. The foyer smelled of leather and cold rain. We stood around the console where the packet had been when Luca set it down earlier. The seal was broken. Paper lay open, a clause facing up with legal language I read like a foreign script until the sentence landed. A paragraph that would place power over my accounts and my decisions into a trustee's hands selected by him. I felt nausea at the specifics. Signatures, witnesses, a notarized page dated the week before. Luca's hand went to the packet as if to collect it. Reading the wrong file, he said. This was for the gala trust arrangements. You don't understand he cut off when Sophia stepped in. Luca, Sophia. Her tone was steady and the words were short. It says she'll have no power to manage her assets without your approval. That is a legal barrier, not a gala detail. Sophia's voice lengthened the syllables in his name so he could not swallow the accusation into silence. We argued in clipped sentences that unspooled like thread. You can't publish this. Luca, we need discretion. For the family's sake, discretion in his mouth always meant containment. For my sake, I replied, my decisions are not a family image, Alina, he said. As if calling me by name would rearrange the facts. Sophia sat on the narrow foyer bench and took my hands in hers. We can delay enforcement, she said. I called Marta. She'll document the packet, make copies, and file a challenge to the way it was executed. I can get you a temporary injunction tonight if we move fast. Her words tumbled over one another in that way she has when she rushes hope into plans. She used names, Marta, the lawyer, like tools and turned them toward me. Hearing concrete steps steadied me. Luca watched the exchange. His fingers went to his ring. He tightened the signet for a beat, then relaxed his hand against his thigh. You are making a drama out of process, he said. This is not about control. It's about protecting assets from exposure. He chose the language of protection and wrapped it in legal terms. Protection disguised itself in his voice as care. I felt anger move through me. It started low, it rose to my throat, and then translated into an action. I pulled the locket from my pocket and cupped it in my palm. The locket was the small vintage piece I kept from before. It was the object I handled when memory promised more clarity than speech. I held it up where Luca could see that the chain caught the light. Stop using words like protect to keep me silent, I said. This clause strips me. It's not protection, it's removal. My words were short. The sentence opened a new tension and pressed at him. He did not answer with the gentleness he sometimes reserved for private mornings. Instead, he reached for the packet. He moved quickly. He tried to take the packet and to palm my wrist as he did. His fingers closed on my forearm. For a moment the house boiled down to the grip and the paper. I jerked back. The action was small but decisive. It sent the packet clattering onto the foyer table. Don't touch me, I said. The words were a snap. I felt fear then, not because of his size, but because physical contact in that way had crossed a line. Fear shifted my thinking. My throat tightened and clarity came in the form of a refusal. I had to show him that he could not sign away a life without my consent. He leaned forward, put the ring on. Alina, he said, sign this and we can fix everything. We can keep appearances. No one needs to know the offer was a gilded trap. I could see how the public face of our marriage would survive if I complied. Instead, I slid the wedding band from my finger and set it on the console between us. The metal made a small, audible clink. Luca's controlled stillness broke for the first time. His thumb twitched against his index finger. You can't, he began. And the sentence fell away because there were no words that could hold what his expression had just revealed. Anger, fear, and something like bewildered loss. Sophia stood and moved behind me. She put a hand on my shoulder and pulled me close enough that I felt the exact line of her breath. Elena, now, she said, call Marta. Let her start the paperwork to freeze enforcement. I have one of her cards. Use mine now. She gave me the same practical urgency I had heard that night when I grabbed the mover's sleeve and said, stop those boxes. This was action. This was not speech. I found myself dialing Marta with numb hands. The phone felt slick with rain. In the background, Luca argued with himself aloud in a low voice. You can't make an enemy out of everyone over one clause, he said. You know how this will look. He named the consequence as if consequence could be heavier than the cost to my autonomy. Marta answered. Her voice was a quick, efficient machine. Document everything now, she said. Photograph the packet, timestamp it, make copies. I'll call the clerk and get a hold on this document. Alina, don't sign anything tonight. Don't let anyone notarize. If he's present, we can still petition for temporary relief. Marta's instructions were a map. They turned our fear into steps. As Marta worked, we moved through the rooms that had once been familiar to me only as background. Each doorway held an accusation. In the study, the desk lamp stood cold. On the small table, the open packet lay with its folded corners like a bell. I photographed each page with my phone and felt each shutter click like a small reclamation. Luca watched me take the pictures. He folded his hands together and the heavy signet ring flashed dark in the lamplight. "You remaking a scene," he said, as if my action were the scandal. We could handle this quietly. His vocabulary narrowed to optics, to apology, to mitigation. He kept trying to move the argument to how outsiders would see us rather than the fact that the packet took away my authority. I felt a surge of something that was not only anger, it was recognition. He believed the family image meant more than a person's right to decide. That idea changed my sense of urgency into something sharper. Who chose the trustee? I asked who signed the names of the witnesses. My voice was steady. I wanted specifics. He inhaled and answered slowly. I did. For the firm. For stability. The word stability like a talisman. I put names forward that will keep our holdings intact if something goes wrong. Elena, sometimes you don't see the dangers. He attempted to make me small by insisting on his foresight. Sophia did not let him finish. Stability does not mean silencing her. She snapped. You made this decision without Elena present. That is not foresight. It's exclusion. Her voice vibrated. Luca's face hardened. That hardness made him human in a way silence never had. I could see the lines around his eyes deepen. Sophia's next move changed the room. She called a photographer friend and asked for proof of presence, security footage, time-stamped photographs from the movers the night the locks changed. Do you remember the night the sofa went down the steps? She said to me quietly, they took pictures when they noticed a problem. They kept a log. She had already turned one earlier memory into evidence. The memory snapped from a private hurt into a recorded moment that could be shown in court. When the security footage came back on a borrowed phone screen, I watched myself open that front door and find men carrying the sofa down the steps. I watched my mouth shape, stop those boxes, and saw the way a mover glanced toward a newbra left on a bench, an odd, human detail that proved presence. Seeing that scene on someone else's device changed the argument by providing a timeline and witnesses. Luca's expression did not change as the footage played. His hands rested on the edge of the sofa in the video, one of the movers steadying the leather. He quietly, I signed things when I thought I was protecting us from exposure. I did not expect you to feel locked out. Hearing him say it aloud was an unexpected pivot. It did not excuse him. It did not erase the clause. But it shifted the emotional texture between us from purely hostile to complicated. I felt a new emotion, something like wary relief, slide into place. Wary because his admission did not undo the legal paper. Relief because his voice had broken enough to reveal intention rather than sheer calculation. Emotion shifted again, suspicion to anger to fear to cautious curiosity. Marta's call returned. She had filed an emergency motion to delay enforcement and requested a temporary hearing first thing in the morning. That legal hold would keep the trustee clause from taking effect while we argued the merits. She that Elena not sign anything, and Elena did not. The temporary relief changed the immediate stakes into a procedural timetable. We had hours now to organize and act. The physical peak of the night came in the study doorway. Luca moved toward me and said, if you push me in public, Elena, you'll risk everything we've built. He tried to speak in terms that suggested logical consequence. But the motion of his shoulder, the set of his mouth, were a physical demand. His palm rose as if to touch my arm, not to take the packet now, but to offer the familiar containment he'd been trained to provide. I pulled back and said, quietly, no more silent management. Then I walked past him and left the band on the table where Sun had once hit it in the morning. The movement was small and deliberate. It was the chapter's turning point. Physical removal of the ring, refusal to let his hand guide my choices. He slumped into the study chair for a long, measured moment. He did not follow. Sophia and I sat at the kitchen counter and mapped out calls. We made lists. Bank accounts, joint assets, personal property, passwords. Each item we checked off felt like a tiny act of recovery. I signed forms to begin freezing transfers. I wrote the number for the trust company and scheduled a meeting with Marta for 9 a.m. The plan was not dramatic. It was slow, procedural, and precise. It felt like moving a puzzle by nudging one piece at a time. At 2 in the morning I packed a single bag. The decision felt light in my hands compared to the weight I had carried for months. I chose a change of clothes, my worn leather notebook, the locket, and Sophia's ceramic mug because she insisted it would remind me of coffee in the mornings I would now have to choose. I left the house by the back door and walked to Sophia's car under the same amber street lamp that had witnessed the gate confrontation. The rain had slowed to a fine mist. Luca came to the porch as I tightened the bag strap. He did not speak at first. When he did, his voice was smaller. Alina, he said, we can do this differently. We can redo the paper. I will agree to an oversight you choose. He offered a procedural surrender that still wanted to shape the outcome. I looked at him. You can agree to oversight now, I said. You can put it on the record. But I'm not erasing the moments that brought me to this point. My words were careful. I had the taste of both relief and sorrow on my tongue. I won't stay because of appearances. I won't stay because you fear what people will say. If you want to keep the family together, you must ask me, not sign me away. The line between us tightened. He breathed, and then he reached out and took the ring from the table with slow, honest hands. He held it between his fingers and pressed it to his palm, like someone learning how to read something he had taken for granted. Then, in a move I did not expect, he set the ring in the center of the desk, not on the console where it had clinked earlier, but in a more visible place. I will not touch it again, he said, not until we can both be present for decisions. His voice was controlled, and I heard the effort to mean it. I did not accept the ring back on my finger. I accepted only that the immediate attempt to take control had been paused. We did not fall into reconciliation that night. There was no cinematic apology, no reconciliation montage. What happened instead was legal and exact. Marta filed motions, the trust company froze the clause, and the trustee selection was placed under temporary review. We arranged a mediator for next week. We scheduled a full accounting. The concrete facts, signed forms, timestamps, phone calls made the emotional shifts actionable. In the small hours, Sophia brewed coffee and we sat at her kitchen table. I held the locket and opened it. Inside was a folded photograph from before Luca. From a time when I had a scholarship letter tucked into a book and my mother had told me to fold my napkin a certain way. I felt an ache that was not only loss but also recognition that parts of me had not been erased. They had been postponed. Morning light came thin and pale. I did not go back to the townhouse. Instead, I met Marta at her office, and we went through the legal checklist: petitions, asset reviews, an injunction, and a request for a hearing. We prepared a statement that included the security footage of the movers and a list of witnesses who could confirm the sudden lock change. The paperwork felt like a map through a labyrinth. By noon, the mediator called. He proposed steps for an equitable separation of holdings and recommended counseling for both sides to address the relational harms. Luca called during the meeting. We arranged a time to meet with the mediator that same afternoon. At the mediator's table, Luca spoke in the same measured cadence he used at home. I did not intend to erase you, he said. He did not make excuses. He stated his intent and left the rest as fact for others to assess. I thought I was preventing a public fallout. I thought my choices would shield us. His words were adult and exhausted. I answered in short sentences. You excluded me from major decisions. You put clauses in place that remove my authority. You did it without telling me. That is not protection. The mediator asked questions and we answered. The negotiation was blunt. Division of assets, custody of the locket and the notebook, the removal of the trustee clause unless it met both our explicit consent. The final agreement that day was not theatrical. It was a set of signatures and conditional clauses. Luca agreed to remove the trustee selection and allow the joint oversight panel to include a neutral third and me. He agreed to release control of personal accounts and allow me to manage certain assets independently. I agreed to a mediated separation rather than an immediate public fight to preserve mutual contacts that supported our business arrangements. When we signed the mediated agreement, the air in the room felt thin but settled. Luca gave up the unilateral power he had used, and I accepted that keeping the company's stability required careful division rather than scorched earth. We both walked out of the mediation with different futures but fewer immediate weapons. That evening I returned to the townhouse to collect the last of my things. I moved through rooms I had once thought immutable. The study with its heavy desk, the bedroom with the neutral drapes, the kitchen with its precise stack of plates. I packed what I needed. I left the photographs that included Luca on business trips. I took the ones that included my mother and the scholarship letter. For the first time in months, I moved through the house with checklist in hand rather than with my mouth full of unsaid questions. Luca met me in the foyer as I set the last box in my car. He did not attempt to stop me. He stood with a stillness that no longer tried to control me. He held a small paper, our mediated agreement, folded in his hand. "I will pay what we arranged," he said, "and I will sign over the oversight we agreed to. I will not fight you about the locket or your notebook." His voice had the thinness of someone who had accepted a consequence. I nodded. I felt an odd absence of triumph. The night had been long and hard, and at its end the action was ordinary. We exchanged signatures, we packed boxes, we made practical arrangements for bank transfers and keys. Sophia hugged me tight and then stepped back. "Call me when you get settled," she said. Her eyes were spare with worry and steadiness both. The final thing I did in the house was set the thin gold band on the small kitchen table and then walk to the front door. I paused, turned, and saw Luca standing by the study doorway. We did not speak. He raised a hand in a small, private nod. I lifted the locket to my mouth and kissed its cold metal. When I closed the front door behind me, the sound was a single, decisive click. The house stayed where it was. I drove away with a bag that held the real artifacts of my life, my notebook, my photograph, the locket, and with the legal papers that made my choices enforceable. The night had begun with betrayal and ended with paperwork and small acts that changed structure. By the time I pulled onto the main road, rain had washed most of the amber light clean. I did not look back. I drove toward an apartment with a narrow balcony and sunlight for mornings. I unpacked and placed the locket on the bedside table beside the worn notebook. The locket's hinge clicked like the faint memory of a different life. But inside it held the photograph that reminded me who I was before the marriage and what I wanted to keep. I did not imagine that the next days would be simple. The mediator's agreement would take time to implement, and there would be conversations and possible legal responses. But the immediate trap, the sealed clause, the unilateral trustee, had been interrupted. I had named betrayal out loud, I had acted with help, and I had taken steps that turned the personal into verifiable evidence. That transformation was not magic. It was a stack of signed forms and a witness list and a lawyer who had stayed past midnight. In the quiet after, I sat with Sophia and planned practical mornings. We mapped bank calls and who would take my old class at the community center. I wrote letters to friends explaining changes in neutral terms. Each small action was a steady repair. The last paragraph of the night closed with one clear decision. I placed the wedding band into an envelope, wrote Luca's name and the date on it, and slid it into the mediated agreement folder before I locked the apartment door. Then I put the locket by the lamp and turned it on. The lamp hummed, warm and ordinary. The sound was not a promise. It was a factual signal that the house I had left would remain filled with its rooms, but I had reclaimed the ability to decide my mornings and my movements. The envelope sat inside the folder on my kitchen table as the final, concrete mark of what I had chosen and what I would carry forward.